Hello and welcome to PR on the Record, the podcast where we explore the role of public relations in shaping success within the tech ecosystem. My name is Ariel Shapiro.
And I'm Shahni Ben-Haim. Today we're thrilled to have Jacob Shwirtz join us on the podcast to discuss the difference between performance marketing, brand marketing, and why brand awareness is necessary for any successful tech company. Jacob is an incredibly impressive marketing executive and entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience. Just in the last few years, he worked as the global head of social media and led all influencer marketing and entertainment partnerships for WeWork, where he generated over $200 million in sales opportunities through partnerships and business development operations that he created, scaled, and led with over 300 global partners. Jacob then became the head of content marketing for Lightricks, leading the team in crafting and executing partnerships with the D'Amelio family, May Musk, Mr. Beast, and many more exciting up-and-comers in the creator ecosystem. He and his team manage all social media presence, talent relationships, experiential and event marketing, and all original and editorial and community endeavors that supported, inspired, and empowered creators. Over the past year, Jacob has tapped back into his entrepreneurial foundation as a fractional CMO, working with creators, influencers, celebrities, investors, entrepreneurs, and brands to implement innovative strategies to scale business development, increase partnerships, and craft effective content and social media strategy and operations that significantly grow revenue and attract investment opportunities. We hope you enjoy this conversation with Jacob. Jacob, what an incredible history you have. Welcome to the show. So we do have some questions for you just to discuss, the topic and what kind of expertise you bring to that topic. And we were wondering if you could first define performance marketing versus brand marketing. What do those entail?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me. In general, I think we're talking about marketing in the broadest sense, and there are different professions that go into marketing. I would really, really advise against using the word versus. It's not one or the other. It's not, one isn't at odds with the other. They're just different components of hopefully a sophisticated, comprehensive marketing strategy that companies ought to have. So with that context, to me, performance marketing is more about the immediate impact, the things that you can measure immediately, like you put something out and you can immediately see how many clicks it got or how many listens it got, something like that, how many subscribers signed up immediately. Whereas brand marketing and other forms of marketing like experiential marketing, influencer marketing, public relations, and more sort of set the stage for that immediate actions of performance marketing. They're the brand awareness. They're letting people know who you are and what you're about. It's the storytelling of the company and product or service before seeing that call to action ad saying, click here to buy now, there's a sale. Do people know who you are? Do they care about you before seeing that ad that will hopefully get them to act immediately?
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting. I really like when you said at the beginning, it's not versus, it's all these different types of marketing on the Markov spectrum, I suppose, kind of working together to reach your goals. So I kind of wonder, within that context, that framework that you were talking about, where do you see PR? Because after all, we talk about PR and that's what we do on a daily basis. So where do you see PR fitting into the brand marketing spectrum?
Yeah, absolutely. It's another critical component that companies shouldn't be picking one over the other. If you're a serious company and pursuing a sophisticated marketing strategy, then you would have all of these components. Just like influencer marketing folks are experts at building and nurturing relationships with creators, their managers and agents, understand the negotiations and the minutia of working with creators. PR professionals understand the minutia of working with media professionals and are out there working every single day to build relationships with journalists and others, with conference organizers, with podcast hosts and others. It's, of course, its own profession with expertise, and you need people who know how to do that, nurturing those relationships, keeping your company top of mind with those kinds of people.
Definitely. I think that part of marketing is keeping that company top of mind. That's certainly an important point. And that's what I talk about consistently when I'm talking about, the efforts that truly bring companies top of mind is having that balance of the paid performance marketing that have the lead generation coming in versus the other brand awareness efforts that have different metrics that measure, how that brand is staying top of mind. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what kind of metrics marketing executives usually look into when they're talking about brand awareness efforts. How are they measuring the effectiveness of those efforts?
Yeah, sure. So obviously for any kind of activity, it would have its own way to judge whether you think you just did a good job or not, whether ultimately you helped the company or what you tried didn't help the company as much. So you need to know for the next time you go out there, will I try to get in that same newspaper again? Will I try to work with that same creator again? Or will I run that same ad again if you're a performance marketer? But measuring all the above is very, very different depending on what you're doing. So when you're working in the realm of performance marketing, you're looking at clicks and conversion rates and how much you paid to bring in a new customer versus how much they're worth. With influencer marketing and general brand awareness, there are other things to look at, buzz in the marketplace, the comments to social media posts, people taking the time to read the comments. How did people leave your offline activation, let's say, if you're at a conference or festival? With the media, are you starting to get new inquiries because you appeared in a certain publication or on a certain podcast? Some things might have more numbers immediately assignable to the efforts, but that doesn't mean that those that don't have numbers more immediately assignable are somehow less worthy or less impactful for a business overall. It's really a mistake, or mistake is putting it lightly, to only look at things that you can measure in the immediate short term. That's not how businesses succeed.
So, there is a lot to look at, as you say. Do you look at the metrics like on a daily basis, or do you kind of take a longer term, view of those and try and look at it over a month or two?
Yeah. So again, it really depends on the kind of activation and what the goal of it was and what you were doing and how you can measure it. But also it's really important to say, again, these kinds of marketing aren't at odds with each other. They're not versus each other. And in the right sophisticated company that understands that, they work well together. So what you're doing with media outreach, of course, can feed into the performance marketing, can be the content and assets for performance marketing. How you're working with an influencer isn't just them posting on their account, but also creating content for your performance marketing, making sure you have the rights to use their production within your performance marketing. If you're doing offline activation, then of course, all the content created from setting up an awesome booth or throwing a party or whatever it might be is all content and assets for performance marketing as well. And so judging which kind of activity ultimately led to the sale at the end is really hard. If we're in business school and people talk about how many impressions it takes until a customer makes a purchasing decision, years ago, maybe it was 7, now maybe it's 15 or 20 times that you need to hear or know about or think about a company, product, service before making a purchasing decision. So I think that brand awareness, influencer marketing, media relations, all of that can account for many of those. And then at the end of the day, then you see an ad that comes to you at the right time in the right place and looks good, captures your attention, and you actually click to buy. That doesn't mean that the ad on its own is what drove you to do that purchase decision.
It's interesting because companies talk about, they want those sales. And it's, from what I've seen recently, is they're consistently talking about those small wins to get the sales, when they don't really take into account the long-term strategy that it takes to build up those sales. And that falls in the background. And then ultimately we see what happens with those companies. It's, very quick climb up the mountain, but a very quick fall down from the mountain as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to say a company simply can't or shouldn't exist in the realm of advertising. When you turn off that advertising spigot like a water faucet, does the company exist? Do people know who you are? Do you have advocates, evangelists, ambassadors out there? Do people think about you? Or do you only exist in the realm of ads? If there's some kind of controversy or your competitor is making noise, if there's something else happening in the world that's relevant to your business, do you have happy customers and people who care about you? Do you have an awareness in the marketplace? Do media personalities know about you to talk about you in the context of these things happening in the marketplace? Or are you completely invisible and only exist as advertising? And when you turn off the ads, you don't exist as a company, and then you're just battling churn. If you're just focusing on performance marketing, but obviously it depends on the kind of company. Things are very different if you're a restaurant or a SaaS business or a consumer product. But if you're just running ads and then someone maybe comes to your LinkedIn or your social media and sees a very unprofessional presence, that might impact their purchasing decision. Again, you can't just think about ads or exist as a company only in the realm of advertising.
Totally.
Yeah, that's really true. And I think just piggybacking off what you said, I think customers really want to see the brands take ownership really of social issues that are important to them as well. Make sure that they are in line with those. So it's not just an ad; it's a whole brand that kind of goes together and really has an important message for their customers.
Yeah, I think brand awareness is the foundation for a lot of that kind of activity. If people don't know your story, don't know who you are, what you stand for, then they might just ignore your ad.
On that note, maybe you can share a little bit about an experience that you've had in your many, many experiences about how, you streamlined that brand story and kind of initiatives that the brand itself took on further than what their actual business sense was, and use that to create an impact in that bottom line, in those sales. If you can share any experience that you've had with that.
Yeah, sure. I can give an example, but again, it's really different depending on the kind of company. Every company needs to think about their own story, their own assets, their values, what they stand for, and then figuring out how to get that across. So you mentioned my time at WeWork. I think that's a good example. It started as what might be considered boring or old school, or just think of in terms of performance marketing, ultimately selling office space or renting office space. But WeWork tried to take a different approach in that. And there's a much longer story around WeWork. But within my world, let's say in terms of influencer partnerships, we were able to do things like build podcast studios for podcasters and let influencers who have a simple pain point, like they get so much free stuff in the mail. We were able to give influencers a place to send that mail instead of to their home. And so we're able to give real value to folks. And then the most authentic, natural integrations, here I'm filming my podcast today at WeWork. Thanks for the space. Or as people were traveling around the world, letting them tap into the global network of WeWork spaces to produce their content and have meetings. And just the little shout outs here and there, the little tags on Instagram locations here and there. Again, not in the form of cheesy ads, not in the form of things that, you just can't wait to click the skip button, but just organic, actual value to people, actual authentic storytelling around that help to really drive a lot of business and bring in all new kinds of customers into that business as a result of those partnerships.
So that's really great, a great example. And you mentioned so many different tactics that you use there. So I just wonder, how many of those did you brainstorm in a meeting, and how many just kind of arose organically?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when you build the right team who gets it, when you're working under the right CMO or CEO who gets it, there definitely does have to be some leeway with brainstorming and creativity and experimentation, because you ultimately don't know what will work. Ultimately, when we're talking about the realms of marketing outside of performance marketing, there is some sort of instinct to it. It has to connect with culture and human psychology and behavior, what people care about, sometimes just the timing of doing something. So being aware of the cultural context that you're operating within. It's not just the colors of an ad or something like that, or tweaking the exact wording of an ad. There's a lot more nuance to it, and that can work really well, and it can also really not work. And so sometimes you have ideas of what's going to work and you hope it clicks, and then sometimes it doesn't work. People are human beings, and so there's only so much you can anticipate and then judge the results based on what happens. Very different than advertising.
Thank you so much. Another question that I have that came up, you talked about all these other initiatives that come and are contributing to brand awareness. Do you think that PR and getting mentioned in media and news is different, is unique in any way with all the other kind of brand awareness initiatives that we can tap into today?
Yeah, again, it's absolutely key and should work really in synergy with all the other marketing efforts. So, for example, at WeWork, when we built podcast studios for some celebrities, getting coverage on that was key to tell the story in professional trade publications that talent and their agents and managers read to say, oh, I never even thought about that. Now I can have a home to film my podcast as I travel as a busy celebrity. So that's absolutely important. And then using those clippings in other marketing efforts is all key. It all has to work together in a very virtuous circle, of course.
And I think nowadays, especially in the startup world, we're seeing that there is really limited budgets at the moment. So do you have any advice on how startups should allocate their funds for brand awareness or performance marketing?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's understandable that early stage companies will devote, when it comes to their marketing budget, will devote a large percentage to performance marketing. They need to show early metrics. They need to show quick momentum to their early stage investors. And again, it's not adversarial. It's not one or the other. But within the realms of brand marketing, influencer marketing, media relations, we try to feed that performance marketing content and stories that can work more so than creative ads on their own without these things that help to set it apart as a company. And so it's hard. Obviously, there's only so much dollars that goes around, and maybe you can't afford to go to a conference or throw a party at a festival, or you can't even pay a publicist maybe what they cost, or you can't bring on board a professional in influencer marketing. But as a company, again, it depends on the kind of company, but let's say a general technology startup, is your LinkedIn okay? Does it look good? Is the English good? Does it tell a good story? Are there red flags there that make it clear that you are not looking at it, or there green flags that show you actually care and are telling the story of your company? Are you only posting content that's clearly coming from ChatGPT, or are you actually telling engaging stories that investors, partners, clients who find you on LinkedIn might actually resonate with them? It doesn't have to cost any money, but it does take some time and attention. And again, authenticity to really try to communicate the story of your company. And there are other ways to get out there and be organic and authentic with how you're engaging with thought leaders in the space. Are you commenting on their content, or are you really just focusing on ads and then everything else is much lower priority where you rely on AI tools and other things and don't really invest? And then those red flags add up and people see that.
You mentioned LinkedIn as a platform now that people can kind of create their own thought leadership content and also really get their story together and tight so that it, provokes emotion to the people that are reading it, to the target audience that they might have. Do you think that there's a difference between a kind of third-party source bringing in and publishing that thought leadership versus your own voice? How does that impact customers or clients of the business, technology, whatever it may be? How does that influence more people to potentially buy what the company is selling?
Yeah, ultimately, as a company, you really need to do all the above. That's why it's not easy creating a company. It's not easy being a CMO or a CEO or a founder. You definitely need to think about how you are organically, authentically sharing the company's story on places like LinkedIn and longer form thought pieces and things like that, and do so in a way that people understand this wasn't just created in ChatGPT. But you also need others to sing your praises and to cover you and talk about you. If you Google a company and the only thing you see are from its founders, that's another red flag. And especially if you're an international company trying to operate on a global level, then you need to overcome additional hurdles because your competitor might be down the block from the person you're trying to sell to and can meet them for coffee and take them out, something like that, woo them in person. And if you're trying to convince them to work with you from the other side of the world, you have to be that much better. So are there customers who are sharing testimonials? Are there media folks who have included you in roundups and articles? Have you been interviewed on relevant podcasts? And it's all possible and doesn't necessarily just take money, but it takes time and attention and a decision to prioritize those efforts. It doesn't cost you anything as a CEO to reach out to the author of an article or a podcast host saying, I read this article you just wrote on this, or I heard your podcast episode on that, and I'd love to tell you more about what we're doing because it's relevant, and here's why we're different. And obviously, 5 out of 10 folks might not reply to you, but some will, or some might not immediately, but maybe a month or two later, and you can't discount that.
Definitely. And for CEOs that may say, okay, time is money, and they spend, time reaching out to them. And if they want those, immediate results or consistent results in terms of journalists, that's when they should be interested in kind of pursuing that and taking some budget aside to really do that. And we see how that brand awareness effort is impacting in the end, the performance marketing aspects of things.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's just silly to see from other areas. As the CEO, you're not also the lawyer, you're not also the accountant, you're not also the janitor in your office. So it's perfectly fine to say, no, I work with professionals. People should know what their strengths and weaknesses are and build the right team, whether it's in-house or external, to help do their professions. Not everyone is an expert in influencer marketing or brand activations or experiential. Certainly not everyone is an expert in media relations and knowing the nuances of establishing and nurturing relationships with the media. And so it's not rocket science to say you should work with experts who do that, just like you do, the CEO isn't the plumber in the office either. They pay someone to do that.
Just this morning, I was reading actually a LinkedIn post that Ariel was mentioned in about the difference between influencers versus experts. And experts can certainly be influencers. Not sure that goes the other way around, but maybe you can, because you've worked in the creator ecosystem and because you've kind of created partnerships that have generated, sales using that avenue, maybe you can enlighten us and give us your take on that.
Yeah, sure. So there's a beautiful spectrum of humanity because ultimately we're talking about people. So you could be an amazing athlete. Does that mean you're an influencer? Does it mean you're a celebrity? That, these words and buzzwords change over time. Now we use the word creator and talent a lot more because we understand that it's more generic, I guess, than being an influencer. Maybe that has sort of a negative connotation of someone who became famous or is interesting just because they're famous, as opposed to having specific skills. And those skills could be to be a great dancer, a great athlete, a great chef, could be an author. So you're an expert, you have your own craft and career, you built a following online, and ultimately you have some form of influence. I definitely think it's important to kind of tease out the buzzwords from what we're actually talking about. If we're talking about influence and convincing people, then the people with influence are experts, are professionals in different fields. And you could be an influencer without millions of followers. Maybe you have influence over a specific group, but from a company perspective, you might want that exact group. And so there's nothing wrong with working with someone who maybe has 1,000 followers, but who are those followers?
Previously, you also talked about the aspect of storytelling. Could you share a little bit about what you might think are the aspects that make a great story, that build a great story? You talked a little bit about authenticity and being organic and, in the age of AI with ChatGPT coming, making sure that doesn't sound somewhat robotic. What else makes a great story, and how does a brand share a story that really kind of resonates with their customers?
Yeah, sure. So I think these days for companies, a lot of companies are founded by engineers or product people. So they've identified a technology or they're thinking about creating products. They don't necessarily come from the world of people who would use it because they're excited by technology and the potentials of technology, which is great. But then they tend to create companies, especially in the early stages. Let's say they're pitching investors or they're trying to get their first few clients, and they're really focused on the technology because that's what they know. So now AI is everything and everywhere. But to me, AI is a tool, a technology. Do I care that this is an AI tool for sound recording or AI tool for translation? Not necessarily. Tell me more about what impact it will have. Will it save me time? Will it empower new business opportunities that I didn't have before? Does it unlock new potential? Does it make my work more efficient or something like that? And so when it comes to the storytelling of a company, especially early stage technology centric companies, I think it's so important to think about the impact, to spark someone's excitement. Oh my God, with this tool, I can save half the time, or I can expand into new markets, or I can bring my product to new audiences that I would have never been able to reach before. What is the impact? And you got to figure out that story. It comes to the core of what someone is doing. And so it might be easier for someone to talk in terms of technology, but that's not necessarily how people are making purchasing decisions. They make decisions based on how it makes you feel or the impact it brings you.
What I keep hearing coming through from Jacob is that the personal is just so important. So yes, we have these AI tools, but at the end of the day, we need to make sure the content is written by a person, or at least reviewed by a person, so it sounds like a person speaking, as opposed to, corporate talk or robots or whatever it may be. Um, so I mean, Jake, you've been doing this for a while now. You had an amazing career. So have you seen that kind of shift through your career of like the more corporate talk to the more personal?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of the story of the rise of influencers. Initially, companies would, we talk about owned channels. So companies owned, let's say, their own social media accounts, their own media channels. And eventually there was this very, very slow transition to realizing, oh, there's only so far I can go with my own owned channels. Because, yeah, of course, the official Twitter account of whatever product is going to tell you to buy that product and that they think the product is great. It's very, very different, and obviously kind of basic thinking to think, oh, if humans tell each other, in the beginning it was called word of mouth, and then it evolved more into influencer marketing. If the celebrity on a show that you love is telling you to watch the show because they're really proud of the work on the show, you're much more likely to watch the show than if the media company or production company behind the show tweets or shares on Instagram about the show. So we just naturally listen to humans more, care about what humans have to say. And now as this evolution continues with what AI brings to the table, it brings amazing efficiencies and capabilities to the table, but it challenges us even more to work harder to bring forth that human soul in what we do. So if you're a CEO thinking about how to get more attention to yourself on LinkedIn, don't just write another post on 5 interview tips or whatever, time management, or the same old kinds of headlines that we've seen on LinkedIn for the last 20 years that anyone can go to ChatGPT today and ask it for 5 interview tips. Instead of that, challenge yourself to actually share something useful. Go above and beyond in creating something that the reader will be able to tell immediately that it came from a human who took the time to create it. We talk a lot about ads, and we know people only look at maybe 1 to 3% of ads on a good day. Otherwise, we just wait until we can click skip ad. So I think in the very same way, now we're seeing more and more people just skipping over content that was clearly written by AI because we're thirsty for and will be attracted much more to the content that we understand was actually created by a human.
How should marketers and companies that are building their performance marketing strategies or brand awareness marketing strategies, how should they use AI properly?
Yeah, there are many great ways to use it. It can edit what you've produced for different formats and specifications across platforms. It can help you with translations. It can help analyze analytics and help you figure out where maybe you lost people or give you ideas for more A/B testing. And more. There are plenty of other great ways to use AI. But when you're presenting something that seems like it's coming from a person, like your CEO writing something on LinkedIn, that's exactly the place to make sure people feel that it came from the CEO and not just an AI tool.
Yeah, so that's so important. And that's a trend that we see in PR as well all the time. Like when I'm reaching out to reporters, and reporters increasingly write on LinkedIn that if they can tell that it's from ChatGPT or it's AI written or whatever, they won't include it. So the personal really is important. I think that's not what people forget necessarily, but I think people put too much of an emphasis on ChatGPT and AI because they can do it in-house, they can do it themselves now. But as you say, you need that personal touch, and you need those experts who have that personal touch to work with you.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
I was recently speaking to somebody who's in content marketing, and they were saying how when you put bad writing into ChatGPT, you get bad writing right back out. So it really is, it is a brainstorming tool. And, when companies that I work with, when they ask me, oh, are you using AI? Who today isn't using AI as a tool for efficiency? But when it comes to making that genuine connection and creating that kind of customer voice through the company, because I think that when you're talking through the customer's voice to the customer, that's when you resonate with them the most. It has to come from the human, because humans know human issues.
Yeah, and little cultural idiosyncrasies and what's happening in the world, and especially if you're trying to market to an international audience that you're not a part of, you need to work harder to understand and be a part of that culture you're marketing to. You can't just do it all in ads from the other side of the world. It's very silly when people ask what kind of tools you're using, or using AI or not, instead of the impact that you're bringing and the content of what you're doing. Like, no one would ask you if you're using a Mac or PC, or when calculators were invented, they're not asking you which kind of calculator you're using. These are all tools, and you'll use the tools in the right ways to do your job and make an impact.
Yeah, so what one piece of advice would you give marketers trying to navigate both brand awareness and performance marketing effectively?
I think they need to think holistically. Again, it's not one or the other. You have a marketing strategy. There are many components of the marketing strategy. It's natural that you would prioritize some over others and spend limited budgets in very thoughtful ways, but that doesn't mean you should ignore other things. Don't put all your time and effort into performance ads and then have your LinkedIn look like your company doesn't exist, or having typos on your website because you undervalue the presentation or the aesthetics because you're focused more on the performance marketing. It all matters. Not everything costs money. Sometimes it just takes the right time. If you're a non-native English speaker, is it that hard to ask a native English speaker who's a friend of yours to review something and make sure that even if there are no typos, it still sounds like an American would say it if you're trying to market to Americans, because all these little red flags just add up over time. So thinking holistically, looking at the analytics, using from one thing to the other. If you do get great press, then obviously that should go into your performance marketing and your organic social media. If you're working with thought leaders, influencers, experts, then that is also part of the performance marketing. It's not separate. And it's important to think about all the above and not just focus on one at the expense of another, because you might think you're doing great, but then people go to your website or go to your LinkedIn and they say, oh man, okay, their ads were great, but if this is how they look here, if this is how they're showing up, if this is how they're telling their story or not, then maybe I shouldn't work with them.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Do you have any other final thoughts on the topic?
I think we covered it.
Amazing. So thank you so much, Jacob, for coming on the show and to share your wisdom with our audience. And remember, if you're a founder trying to get your startup noticed, or a marketer looking to up your PR game, we hope this conversation with Jacob gave you more of an understanding as to why brand marketing is so crucial and how PR plays a role in that.
Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you have any questions or suggestions on topics we should talk about, send us your thoughts at prontheRec@gmail.com. That's prontheREC@gmail.com. Thank you all for listening. And again, I'm Ariel.
And I'm Shahni. And that's Jacob. And this was PR on the Record, going off the record. See you next time.